Okay, so in this part of the tutorial, I'm going to do the sample homework lab. And I think there were some questions about how to submit the labs on ZyBooks and how to upload the labs on eLC. So let's go ahead and do the example lab, which is a very simple lab. It's a Hello World example. Okay. So in this lab, there are 3 parts. The first part, you need to write a program to output Hello World. The second part, you need to add a second line, how are you? And then the third part, there's a third line, which is I am fine. Okay. Now the thing with the ZyBooks lab is that those labs are auto-graded, and they auto-grade based on matching your output with the expected output. So sometimes they're a bit finicky, like if you ignore a space, or if you use a lowercase instead of an uppercase, your submission won't be accepted. But those kind of errors are easy to fix. You just notice, you just take a look at the expected output and your output and try to fix it. Now whenever there are variables in ZyBooks, or whenever there is input, ZyBook will change the values of those variables in submit mode. So it's not going to test your program based on the values you see, but it will go and test it on different values. So it's very important whenever you have variables to write a generic program that will make use of the values of the variables. In other words, don't code values in the program. Don't hard code values in the program. Use variables instead of values. So in the lab environment, you can see that there are 2 modes, develop mode and submit mode. And whenever the program reads an input, it gives you the opportunity of entering the input in this text area. Okay. In this lab, there is no input, so I'm going to leave it empty. So develop mode allows you to edit and run your program, and it's going to run the program and give you the output down there. Okay. So, and if there are errors in the program, it's going to notify you about those errors. So it's always a good idea to start in develop mode and try to go as as much as you can, and only switch to submit mode when you think you're ready to submit. Now in homework labs, I don't limit the number of submits that you can submit, as long as people do not abuse it. So if I see somebody submitting 100 times just to get the question correct, this is not a good sign. When I've seen it in quizzes, when the quiz is basically released multiple times, some people just want to kind of click on options to get the grade correct. Usually under submit mode, ZyBook is going to run your program and match the output. So let's make a slight mistake in here. Let's say, for instance, I'm doing hello with a small h. And if I submit for grading, it's going to run my program, and then it's going to tell me that my output, which is small h, does not match with the expected output, which is uppercase H. Okay, so it's not giving me the point. For the second part, I'm not even printing how are you, so I'm not going to get the point. And for the third part, I'm not printing I'm fine, so I'm not going to get the point, right? So I'm getting 0/3. So let's fix those errors one by one. Now you can work on ZyBooks, and then once you're done, switch to Eclipse, or alternatively you can work in Eclipse and switch to ZyBooks. I mean, it really doesn't make a difference. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to create an Eclipse project and then work on it and submit, copy my code back to ZyBooks when I want to submit. So I'm going to switch to Eclipse here. And I'm going to create a new project. Okay, so I'm going to create a new project, Java project. Let's call it tutorial 2. Okay, finish. Within tutorial 2, I'm going to create a class. Now notice that this is a class that is called basic output, so I'm going to create a class that matches the same name. Okay, so I'm going to create a class named basic output, and I can tick public static void main, but basically at this point what I'm going to do, I'm going just to copy and paste everything from ZyBooks to Eclipse. Okay, so I'm going to copy paste this here. Okay, and then I'm going to run. It's asking me to save and run. I'm getting hello world. Now let's fix that first mistake. The first error, ZyBook is basically complaining about the H being small case. So this is a self-made mistake, self-inflicted mistake. I'm going to put it back as a capital H. Okay. Now for the second part, we are asked to print a second line, which is how are you and question mark. Okay. Now notice that there is this special symbol in here, and this indicates that ZyBooks is expecting a new line after this line. So what I'm going to do, this is a hint that you will need to use print line instead of print. So what I'm going to do, I'm going just to add a second print line statement. Print line, how are you, question mark. Okay, semicolon, and then I'm going to run. Okay, so let's say I'm done running and testing the program in Eclipse. I'm ready to submit. Then I can just copy and paste the code back to ZyBooks. Okay, and I can try to run or I can submit for grading. And in this trial, you can see that I got 2 parts correct, the first one and the second one. Okay, it's still complaining about the last one, which is I'm fine. So let's fix this one. And to fix this one, basically we need another print line statement. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to do system.out.println. Now this one is a bit tricky because apparently there are some spaces. I think those are either 3 or 4 spaces. You can see that the font used here, it's a fixed width font, right? So the characters are aligned. So if you look at the parentheses here, it aligns with the space. So if I'm going to guess, it's actually 3 spaces. Okay, so I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and then fine, and then close the parentheses, and then period. Okay, so I'm going to run. It looks okay to me. Maybe there are 4 spaces, but we can try to submit. Now before submission, I'm going just to leave a comment just to make my program more readable. This program prints 3 lines of code, author, okay, date 24th. Okay, let's try this this one. So copy paste to ZyBooks, and then let's try submit it for grading. Now, so this time we got all the 3 parts correct, and in this case you're done. Okay. Now, often you submit for grading, you get your score, but then if you go back to the ZyBooks I don't know how you guys see your grade, but many often you go to kind of the table of content and you don't see your grade reflected. Like for instance, if I do this, probably for you it's a bit different. If I do this, I mean this is an average for the class, but basically sometimes you may submit and you still see 0%. If this is the case, try to refresh your browser so ZyBooks load the data one more time. Now, I usually like to work in Eclipse and copy and paste to ZyBooks. The reason is that, I mean, this is a small program, so it doesn't really make a difference. But once you have large programs with multiple classes, it will become much more efficient to work in Eclipse rather than working in the limited ZyBooks environment. The second reason is that I'm asking you to export your work and submit it to eLC. And there are two reasons for doing so. The first reason is that I'd like you to kind of practice working in Eclipse. So this forces you to work in Eclipse and or ZyBooks. And the second reason is that I'd like to have a copy of your submission. Should there be any issue with ZyBooks and auto-grading, I still, want to be able to examine your submission manually. Okay. So for home labs, you will have an eLC Dropbox, and I don't think I have a Dropbox for this one. But basically, a Dropbox is a place in eLC where you can submit your work. So for instance, in labs, under lab 1, you can see there is this Dropbox here, and if you go to it, it gives you a chance to upload a file. Okay. Now the project itself is composed of multiple files. In this example, there is only one class, so there is only one source code file under SRC. But in general, you may have multiple files. And in addition to source code files, in the future you may have documentation, and as we will see, we will have binary files which are created by the Java compiler. That's why to submit your work, you'll need to archive it and put all the files in one archive zip file. Okay. Now in Eclipse, this is very easy. You can go to File, Export, and under Export, General, click on Archive File, click to Next. Now this is important because it's going to ask you what project you want to export. Make sure you're exporting the project you're supposed to submit on only that project. So for instance, Tutorial 2, I'm going to tick Tutorial 2, and then I'm going to select the location where I want to place the archive file. Let's put it under Desktop, Tutorial 2. Okay, so it's going to save under Desktop tutorial2.zip. Once I'm done, I can click on Finish, and it created the Tutorial 2 file for me. Next, you go to eLC, hit Upload or drag and drop. If you click on Upload, you go to your desktop here, and then you can hit Tutorial 2, and once you're done, you hit Submit. So on eLC Dropboxes, I only allow one file, and I'm only keep the latest submission. So you still have a chance if you want to review your work before the deadline. That's fine. It's going to override your previous submission. And again, as I mentioned, if you're working in a group, just make sure all the group members submit the same the same code in both ZyBooks and eLC, just to avoid issues. Now, as I said, I'm not going to look at your submissions in eLC unless there are issues with the auto-grading. Then we'll switch to manual mode. But hopefully, the auto-grading will work fine in most cases. That's it. Another small detail is that ZyBook will allow you to work on the labs. So once you're done, even after the deadline, say for instance you want to review lab 1-1 or 1-2, it's still possible to do so. On eLC, your submissions are time-stamped, and this is a way for me to, know which, who submitted on time or who submitted before the deadline. And there are penalties of submitting. I think it was 25% in 24 hours, 50% in 48 hours, and afterward it's not accepted. So once you're done, you're free to go back to your ZyBook and exercise the labs. Just make sure you submit on eLC on time. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Do you want both under one zip file?
What do you mean by both? Yeah. So for instance, lab 1-1 and lab 1-2. Let's say for the sake of this example that we're doing lab 1, and in lab 1, as you can see, there are two classes. One of them is called output with VARs, with variables, and the second one is called ASCII art, right? So in this case, for the sake of this example, let's say we're working on lab 1 project, and we've got two classes. So what you need to do, you need to create the two classes under the same project. So a new class, for instance, and this one will be output with vars, okay? And once you're done, create another class, a second class. I think the name was ASCII art or something similar. You create it in the same project, okay? And once you're done, you can export lab 1, and that export will contain both classes for the two parts, okay? And as I said, the eLC submission only accepts one file. So if you by mistake submit a second file, it's going to delete the previous file. So make sure both parts, or if it's a multiple part lab, all of the classes are in the same project you're exporting. Okay.